There are moments in life when the stage is bigger than a performance, when the mic is more than just a tool. It becomes a voice for those who no longer have one. And sometimes the cap and gown, symbols of success, become a uniform for battle, a peaceful protest against injustice. At Harvard's commencement this year, something powerful happened. It wasn't just about diplomas. It wasn't just about celebrating academic excellence. It became about moral excellence. It became a message to the world. Even if you try to silence us, we will still speak up. Sometimes life will offer you a choice, to be comfortable or to be convicted. And most of the time, comfort is easier. It's quieter. It's safer. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't shake systems. And it definitely doesn't disturb the peace. But what happens when the peace you're protecting is not real peace, but silence in the face of injustice? Convictions don't ask for comfort. They ask for courage. They pull you out of the crowd, call you out from behind the scenes, and place you in the middle of conversations most people avoid. It's uncomfortable, it's risky, and sometimes it feels incredibly lonely. But that's the thing about conviction. It doesn't wait for permission. It just moves when it knows something's wrong. There are people in this world who are willing to let everything stay the same just to avoid the weight of speaking out. And then, there are people who can't sleep at night knowing they didn't say something when it mattered. You know who they are? The ones who raise their hand in a silent room. The ones who kneel in protest when everyone else is standing. The ones who use their voice not to make noise, but to speak truth, even when it's unpopular. Because real conviction, it's not loud. It doesn't scream to be seen. It doesn't argue to win. It simply shows up consistently when it matters most. Comfort would have told those Harvard students to smile, walk the stage, take the diploma, and keep their beliefs to themselves. But conviction told them, no, this is not just a graduation. This is an opportunity. This is a moment. And sometimes, moments like these don't come back. You either use them with boldness or you regret them in silence. And that's the wrestle, isn't it? Comfort asks you, what will people say? Conviction asks you, what will God say? Comfort says, protect your future. Conviction says, protect your soul. Comfort says, stay neutral. But conviction, it refuses, because neutrality in the face of injustice is still a choice, and often it sides with the oppressor. Those students could have stayed quiet. They had every reason to, but something inside them knew. Degrees come and go. Achievements fade. Accolades get forgotten. But standing for something greater than yourself, that stays. That leaves a mark, not just in history, but in hearts. You see, there's a kind of fulfillment that comfort can never give. The kind that doesn't come from applause or titles or even, it comes from knowing, I did what was right. I showed up when it mattered. I didn't hide my voice because of fear. That kind of peace, the one that follows conviction, is deeper than any comfort the world could offer. And yes, it costs something. Sometimes your reputation, sometimes your relationships, sometimes the very path you worked so hard to walk. But the reward, a life of purpose, a life that meant something, a life that didn't just exist quietly, but lived boldly. If you ever find yourself in that place between comfort and conviction, listen to the still small voice. Not the voice of the crowd, not the pressure of popularity, but the voice inside you that still believes in truth, in justice, in mercy. Because no matter how small your platform is, no matter how little you think your voice carries, it matters. You matter. And when you speak with conviction, not for yourself, but for those who have no voice, something shifts. It may not change the whole world, but it might change someone's world. And that is worth every discomfort. So if your heart is burning for something more than just what's easy, lean in. If your voice trembles every time you try to speak, let it tremble. Because trembling with truth is still braver than standing still in silence. Conviction isn't glamorous. It's not always celebrated, but it's the seed of every real movement, the beginning of every lasting change, and the heartbeat of every life that truly makes a difference. There are times in life when everything around you tells you to stay quiet, when the rules are clear. Don't speak, don't resist, don't challenge. Because if you do, there will be consequences. But even in the middle of fear, even when the pressure is high and the silence feels safer, courage has a way of breaking through. That's the thing about real courage. It doesn't come when everything is going well. It shows up when everything is against you, when you know the cost, when you've heard the warnings, when you've seen what happens to others who tried and failed and still you choose to speak. Crackdowns are meant to intimidate, to send a message, don't try it. They punish not just to correct, but to discourage, to make an example out of someone so the rest of the world learns to fall in line. But what if someone refuses? What if someone says, I see the risk and I'm still not backing down? What if courage can't be managed, restricted, or shut down, even by the strongest system? That's what we witnessed. Students, young and bold, standing not just for themselves, but for people they've never met. They weren't paid, they weren't protected, and they weren't promised anything in return. But their hearts were heavy. Heavy with images of children under rubble, heavy with stories of families broken apart, heavy with the weight of silence that had lasted too long. They could have looked away, they could have said, it's not my fight. But they didn't. Because when you carry compassion in your chest, it doesn't matter where the pain is coming from. It becomes personal. And suddenly, speaking out isn't just a decision. It's a responsibility. And yes, they were punished. Yes, there were letters, suspensions, denied diploma. You can block a transcript. You can silence a microphone. But you can't kill courage. Because courage doesn't live on paper. It doesn't need permission. It grows in the quiet spaces. The heart, the conscience, the soul. Crackdowns may work for a moment. They may create fear. They may force others to think twice. But courage is contagious. Courage multiplies. You see someone stand up in the face of power, and it reminds you of your own strength. It reminds you that fear doesn't have the final say. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has nothing to lose, except their integrity. When you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood, rejected, or punished, you become unstoppable. Because now your purpose is bigger than your comfort, and your message is louder than your fear. That's what happened in that commencement ceremony. They didn't ask for a revolution. They didn't shout with hate. They stood with dignity. And the world listened, not because they were loud, but because they were true. You can shut down an event, you can clear out a protest, you can erase names from records, but you cannot erase conviction. You cannot erase truth. And you definitely cannot erase a heart that burns for justice. The world has tried to silence the brave before, and every time courage rose again. Through letters written from prison, through marches under rain, through whispered prayers behind locked doors, courage has always found a way. So let the world try, let it set rules, let it draw lines, let it issue threats. Because for every crackdown, there will be a comeback. For every silencing, a new voice will rise. And for every student told to stay quiet, there will be another who says, not this time. Courage doesn't need approval. It just needs one heart willing to act. And once it starts, it spreads. One voice becomes two, two becomes 10, 10 becomes a movement. And before you know it, silence is no longer the norm. Truth is. So no matter how hard they try, no matter how loud the crackdowns become, they will never be louder than courage. Graduation. The moment every student waits for, the day when years of hard work finally pay off. You wear the robe, toss the cap, hold the diploma, and take pictures with your proud family. It's supposed to be the ending of a chapter, the closing of a long, tiring journey. But for some, It's not an ending at all. It's the beginning of something far deeper. Because some people don't just graduate with knowledge, they graduate with purpose. For them, that stage is not just a place of recognition, it's a place of decision. Do I walk off this platform and quietly blend in with the world? Or do I step into something bigger than myself? Because that's what true advocacy is. Stepping out of your comfort and into someone else's pain. It's using your freedom to fight for someone who doesn't have theirs. And at Harvard, we saw that unfold in the most powerful way. Students didn't just celebrate their degrees, they used their moment to declare their stand. They understood something many forget. Graduation is not just about who you've become, it's about what you're going to do with who you've become. What is the point of a world-class education if it doesn't lead to a world-changing compassion? Those students had every reason to just enjoy the day, to smile, wave, walk away with a piece of paper and a bright future. But they chose something harder. They chose to carry the weight of another nation's sorrow, to speak the names of people they may never meet, to shed light on a pain the world keeps ignoring. And it wasn't just about Palestine, it was about principle. It was about standing up when standing up could cost them everything. You see, when you advocate for someone else, you put yourself at risk. You risk your comfort, your reputation, your opportunities. But you also gain something that no degree can give you. You gain purpose. You gain a reason. You gain a voice that matters. We live in a time where it's easy to post, to comment, to speak behind a screen. But advocacy, real advocacy, it requires presence. It requires showing up. It requires being seen. And not just when it's trending, not just when it's safe, but when it's uncomfortable, when it could cost you everything you worked for. Those students chose advocacy over applause. They understood this moment is not about me. This platform is not mine to keep, it's mine to use. For good, for truth, for justice. And that's the challenge for every graduate, for every young person stepping into the world today. What will you do with your platform? What will you do with your freedom, your influence, your opportunities? Because education means nothing if it ends with you. It only finds meaning when it serves others. You don't need to be loud to be an advocate. You just need to be clear. Clear about what you stand for, clear about who you're standing with. It's not always about protests or speeches. Sometimes it's about consistency, about the daily choice to care, to speak, to show up, even when no one's clapping. Those graduates reminded us that courage doesn't retire, it doesn't graduate, it grows, it evolves, it turns into policy, art, education, storytelling, community work. It becomes action, quiet, steady, and relentless. And that's what this world needs. Not just professionals with ambition, but people with conviction. People who understand that true success is not just achieving for yourself, but lifting others as you rise. So no, graduation is not the end. It's just the beginning of using what you've learned, to heal what others have lost, to defend what others fear, to speak when others can't, to love when the world has grown numb. Because when you leave the stage, the real test begins. Will you use your voice for more than just yourself? Will you make your knowledge count for someone else's freedom? Will you live for something that outlives you? That is the true beginning. And it's a journey worth taking. Speaking up will always come with a risk. There's the risk of being misunderstood, the risk of being judged, the risk of being rejected, isolated, or labeled. It's not easy to raise your voice when everyone else is quiet. Especially when the silence has become normal, when people have learned to turn their faces away, and when truth has become uncomfortable to hear. But the truth doesn't disappear just because no one wants to say it. And sometimes what you choose not to say speaks louder than anything else. There comes a moment in life when you're faced with two choices. Protect yourself or protect what's right, because you can't do both. Those Harvard students, they knew what was at stake. They weren't naive. They knew that speaking up might cost them their moment, their recognition, even their future. But they also knew something else. Silence would have been a betrayal. A betrayal to the people suffering. a betrayal to their conscience, a betrayal to the truth that was burning inside them. You can't claim to care and stay quiet at the same time, because real care has a voice. Real love is never silent. We often think that by staying quiet, we're staying neutral, that silence is wisdom, that silence keeps the peace. But sometimes, silence doesn't keep peace. It protects injustice. And when your silence allows pain to continue, it's no longer harmless. It becomes agreement. The world teaches us to stay safe, to protect our image, to keep our opportunities, to play it smart. But what good is it to have a perfect image if inside you're carrying the guilt of not speaking when it mattered? Sometimes the thing you're most afraid to say is the very thing that someone desperately needs to hear. Because words can open eyes. Words can build bridges. Words can stir hearts. Words can move mountains that silence never will. It's not just about being right. It's about being real, about using your voice not to create noise, but to carry truth. Even if your voice shakes, even if it's not polished, even if it costs you something. Because when you know that something is wrong, truly wrong, and you stay quiet to stay safe, you will carry that silence with you. And over time, silence grows heavy. It becomes a burden you carry in your soul. A whisper that never leaves you. You could have spoken. You should have spoken. Those graduates, they chose risk. They chose the hard path. They chose the path with no applause, no guarantees, and no safety net. But they also chose integrity. They chose to look history in the face and say, we will not pretend we didn't see. And that kind of courage, it's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's honest. And it's needed now more than ever. Because the world isn't just changed by the powerful, it's changed by the brave. By those who speak even when their voice is the only one. By those who step forward when everyone else steps back. By those who refuse to let fear write their story. And you don't need a platform to speak up. You don't need a title. All you need is a heart that breaks for what breaks others. A heart that's willing to risk misunderstanding for the sake of truth. Because silence may keep you safe, but it can never keep you free. True freedom is found in honesty, in standing up, in using your voice to protect what's right, even when it's not popular. So yes, speaking up is a risk. You might lose followers. You might lose comfort. You might lose people. But silence might cost you your peace, your integrity, your calling. So choose the risk, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's scary. Because in the end, it's better to stand alone with truth than to sit quietly in the crowd of compromise. There are moments in life when standing up for someone else becomes the very moment you finally understand who you are. Because it's easy to go through life thinking we're defined by what we do, by our career, our achievements, our titles, our roles. But real identity doesn't come from what you gain. It comes from what you're willing to give, especially when no one's watching, especially when it's not about you. When you stand for others, something inside you changes. You stop thinking only of your world, and you begin to feel the weight of someone else's pain. You begin to ask questions that don't serve your comfort, but serve your conscience. You stop saying, that's not my problem. And you start asking, what if it were me? What if that was my family? What if that was my country? What if I had no voice? And that's the moment the shift happens. When your life becomes less about success and more about significance. Because it's not about standing for those who are already celebrated. It's about standing for those the world has forgotten. It's about using your name to speak the names others try to erase. The truth is, it takes strength to speak up for someone else because you're choosing to carry a burden that doesn't benefit you directly. You're choosing discomfort when you could have just walked away. But in that choice, you discover something powerful. That who you are is not defined by your silence, but by your stand. It's in those moments that you discover your deepest values. What breaks your heart? What stirs your spirit? what keeps you awake at night, not out of fear, but out of compassion. And that's not weakness, that's purpose. We saw this in the students who chose to make their graduation about more than just a degree. They didn't do it for attention. They didn't do it for praise. They did it because their hearts couldn't unsee what they saw. They knew their silence would feel like betrayal, not to themselves, but to the ones who don't have the privilege of a platform. And isn't that what privilege is really for? To become a bridge, to become a voice, to use your freedom to fight for someone else's. When you do that, when you stand in the gap for someone who's hurting, you learn who you really are. Not the version you post, not the version you dress up, but the real you. The one who believes in justice, the one who isn't afraid of consequences when the cause is greater than the cost. Because sometimes it's not the world that needs to change, it's us. We need to care more, listen deeper, speak braver. And when we do that, when we step outside of our comfort to stand with someone else, we begin to live differently, we begin to love differently, we begin to lead differently. That's when the degree matters. Not because of the paper, but because of the purpose behind it. Not because you walked the stage, but because you chose to stand in the storm. You find your identity not by chasing approval, but by choosing integrity. Not by gaining applause, but by giving a voice to the voiceless. And that discovery is sacred. Because in the end, people won't remember your grades. They won't remember your resume. They'll remember your courage. They'll remember what you stood for when it wasn't easy. They'll remember the moment you became more than just a name, but a light. So when you get the chance to stand for someone else, take it. Not because it's safe, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And when you do, you won't just help someone else. You'll meet the truest version of yourself, the one who was born not just to succeed, but to stand. They graduated with honors, yes, but more than that, they graduated with integrity. Because in a world that rewards silence, they chose to speak. And in a world that often celebrates what you achieve, they reminded us to celebrate what you believe. So today, I leave you with this. Your voice is your power. Use it. Not just when it's safe, but especially when it's not, because truth will always find a way to rise. And as long as there's even one voice left willing to speak, hope lives on.